Good morning, everyone. Hi, and welcome back. I hope you're doing well. So far this week, y'all have been doing a great job by responding to the discussion board, and last week's mural board turned out really beautiful, and I'm really thrilled with it. I hope to get caught up on grading a little bit this weekend, so you should be able to see your grades reflect all of the work that you've been doing. This week, we have a lecture called Gente de Maíz, or People of Corn. And this is one of my favorite lectures because we're starting to understand our indigenous ancestry as people of Latin American descent, specifically from Southern Mexico and Central America. So if you didn't think you had any indigenous ancestry, you might be surprised to learn about some of the things that we're speaking on today and how they might be incorporated in your lives already without even knowing. We all are from somewhere, right? And I think with last week, as we reflect on the different identities, how to identify, I'm so confused, but it's so important, that's okay. But one thing I would recommend you doing is to reflect on your ancestry, where your family is coming from, where they have lived, and just really try to understand that as best as you can. So yes, you can ask your parents questions, and it's just so key moving forward if we're going to be able to retain our culture and retain indigenous culture, indigenous ancestry. It's really important to know where you're from. So that's what this lecture is about. It's about tracing those roots of where we're from by looking at corn, because corn has persisted for thousands of years. And I hope you'll be as mystified by corn as I am. It's really a unique food that is so central and so key to our diets, but has been used differently over time. And it's also very symbolic. So I will be talking about the reading while we go through the slides as well. Okay, Gente de Maíz, People of Corn. Here's an image by Mario Chacon. Mario Chacon is also an artist of some of the murals in Chicano Park. And I love this image because it shows the kernels of the corn in the shape of a heart with the husks around it. And throughout this presentation, we will see artwork done by artists to not only honor the use of corn, but commemorate, again, the indigenous ancestry and legacy. Here are your keywords for today. Pre-Columbian and Mesoamerica. Pre-Columbian means the history of the Americas before the influence of European conquest and colonization. So whenever we use this word pre-Columbian, we're referring to the time that existed before colonization. Mesoamerica is a geographical and cultural region in the Americas extending from central Mexico down through Central America. So that's where I was speaking to before. The indigenous people of Mesoamerica are, when you look at a map, they're coming from Ciudad Mexico, Mexico City, and then all the way down to El Salvador. So Mesoamerica is referring to that place on the map, but it's also referring to the culture of the people that were there. So Mesoamerica. The further reading that I gave you, it's coming out of Our Sacred Maíz is Our Mother. This is the person who wrote it. His name is Roberto Cintle Rodriguez, and he is coming from the University of Arizona. He is a professor in the Department of Mexican American Studies. And I just like to include his information so that we know who we're learning from. For example, this is an academic who is also very invested in political education. So he really wants to understand why we haven't been taught this information before, right? He wants to bring the Mexican American, the Chicano perspective into light and make it more common to learn this history like you are in high school. It's pretty amazing that you all are in this class in high school, because a lot of people only take it in college. So it takes them a lot longer to learn their history and understand this information. And so he's famous for saying, if you want to know where we come from, follow the corn. So this entire book is about maize, and it's tracing this history of the use of corn and the people who cultivated it. Again, here's some artwork. This is from Dignidad Rebelde, and these are posters that are meant to harness that power of corn, like we talked about. We are the people of corn, somos de maíz. And it is communicating the fact that corn is so central to our culture and our people. And furthermore, it helped develop and cultivate civilizations. One of the biggest and most innovative civilizations, and that is in Mesoamerica. So in the book, he does a great job of breaking down his argument, and this is one of his main arguments, and he breaks it down beginning on page 113. So on 113, he lays out an argument for this quote: corn is a civilizational marker, racialized identifier, cultural identity maker, placemaker, former of collective memory, and creator of story, creator of narrative. And so this might look like a bunch of words to you right now, but he does a really good job in the chapter describing what each of these points means. And it's really important for you to go back and write that down in your notes. But I'm going to break it down for you as well in this presentation. So corn is a civilizational marker and cultural identity maker. Okay, what does that mean? So corn is a civilizational marker. So that means that corn marks where a civilization is from, right? So corn tells us where a people is from. And it also tells us about their cultural identity. That's his argument. And he includes this quote on page 111, which talks about how we don't know our history and how we haven't had access to learning about our indigenous ancestry. And that's for a reason. And the reason is colonialism. The reason is the Spaniards coming and taking over our history and our culture and our people. He uses the argument by Bonfil Batalla, and he says that the notion of the lack of continuity is a function of colonialism, and that current identities are products of colonial imposition. So basically what that means is that this lack of continuity, right, this kind of break in our history of indigenous to, Mexican American, and not thinking of yourself as indigenous, right? There's a break in that history somewhere. Something happened where no longer do we readily identify with being indigenous. And what he says is that happened because of colonialism, because of the Spaniards coming and taking over the Aztec Empire. And from then on, the nation of Mexico being built, and Mexico is infamous for not recognizing indigenous or African ancestry. And so that's a product of colonialism. That's a product of what has happened where our indigenous culture was stolen, right, by outsiders. And so today we still experience that lack of continuity when we don't think of ourselves as indigenous, right? When we just have no idea where we're from and we're just told we're Mexican, right? Especially, I'm speaking to folks who are of Mexican descent. When we're told, you're Mexican, it's like, yes, that is the nation, that's the country that we're from. But who are we further than that, right? Because Mexico has only been a nation since 1821. So who are we beyond being Mexican? I think that's really important to think about. I want to continue on. Another idea that he brings up is tortillas as being a form of cultural resistance. So cultural resistance meaning resisting colonization, right? And living on. That's so important in this class. We're going to be talking about indigenous resistance, cultural resistance. Because tortillas act as a portal for ancient indigenous memory. They are the residue of a memory. So when we hold tortillas, we're holding a piece of history. We're holding food that our ancestors have been making for 10,000 years, if not more. So yeah, corn is like a photo album, you know, you look at it, but you also feel it and you also taste it, and it brings you back. It brings you back to your people who have been thriving off of this food for 10,000 years. Um, and today, you know, when we see products of corn being shifted from the original use of masa and corn tortillas, we often see it in the store as in a way that is very stereotypical, right? And kind of waters down the culture. So these images are just showing a Native woman who is also corn here on the box to kind of symbolize and communicate what is here. And then this photo in the middle is of a corn stalk, and apparently if you put a spout in it, the oil comes out, which we know is not true. But these pictures are meant to sell the corn product and tell you that it's coming from corn itself and from the woman who is corn herself. And so we have these attempts to connect us, right, to the source, to the indigenous ancestry, but they're done in a very modern and US American way, right, which actually disconnects us from our culture. So we do, he does talk about in the chapter, he does a really great study in the second half of the chapter in regards to looking at images on tortilla packaging. And basically what I want to point out from here is that he states that for folks who have been using corn and making tortillas for years, don't include images on their packaging. Images are only on the packaging for outsiders, basically, he is referring to. And so, you know, for folks who go get it from the market, it more so looks like this. For folks who get it at a grocery store, you need these signifiers of what is in the package, right? And where is it coming from? It's corn, it's coming from a farm. Here, you know, again, this is corn, this is a corn product. But typically, you know, think of when you go buy tortillas, they're just in a plastic bag or, you know, handed to you right after they've been made. So thinking about, you know, who consumes tortillas and how they still pass on our indigenous ancestry. And then as we continue into the big grocery stores, right? The big grocery stores have packaging like this, which again is pointing to the fact that they're from corn, but also they're telling non-indigenous people, non-Latinos, what these are for. So tacos are being used for corn, or like tortillas are being used for tacos, sorry. Tortillas are being used for taco sliders. And what that means is that the more you communicate what's on the packaging, the more that it's not for someone of that culture, right? And not to say that you shouldn't eat it. I'm not saying that. What we're saying is that we want to pay attention to the images, and we want to pay attention to how this indigenous culture from 10,000 years ago is being spread, right? It's being spread to other cultures. So that section in the book is the Tortilla Mapping Project on page 116. Okay, I only want to speak for about 10 minutes more, so I'm going to set a timer and try to hustle quickly. All right. Secondly, corn is creator of narrative story, corn is creator of story. Narrative isn't a keyword I haven't given you yet, but narrative basically means story, the way you tell a story. So corn is creator of story and collective memory. So one example of this is The shape of tortillas. So the shape of tortillas, which how you say tortillas in Nahuatl is tlaxcali. So the shape of tlaxcali is replicating the shape of the calendar. And the calendar is a Mesoamerican invention. And so you have the production of corn, but also the production of telling time, right? And so these two things are deeply connected and teach us about this significant shape, right, of a circle, of continuing on in time, of continuing the legacy. And so for tortillas, Tlaxcali to be shaped after this calendar, after this symbolic shape, it tells us the story of our people. Another part of that story is Hunhunapu. Hunhunapu is a Mayan maize god, and he is prayed to for successful crops. So he is part of the story as well. And I'm going to let you look at that in the lecture slides on your own. Another part of that story is Xilonen, the Aztec corn goddess. She also has an alternative name of Xico Mecotl, and she is associated with luck and generative power. She's often shown holding 2 corn cobs in each hand. So she's part of the story as well. And then we have artists today who are continuing to make their own images, continuing to tell the story of corn as being central to their indigenous culture. And this is Corn Mother by Paula Lopez. And as you can see, the corn is in place of the Virgen de Guadalupe, right? So she's playing on that idea that corn is as important and is as religious as Virgen de Guadalupe, right? As central to our diets. Here's another common image that you'll see. This is the maize tree. The maize tree, again, just shares about this circle of life and how corn is at the center of it. Corn as placemaker. So corn tells us about the place where it's from, right? And so we learn about how corn was cultivated. And you can go ahead and read this on your own in the lecture slides, but the way that corn was cultivated is so significant to modern planting today. They used a technique called the Three Sisters method, which of course they developed, right? Because they were the first ones, indigenous people meaning the first of that land. And so they planted corn, beans, and squash together so that they would grow harmoniously together. So you have the corn stalk going up, the bean vine wrapping up that corn stalk, and then the squash on the bottom with the big leaves that protect the ground from the sun. They help shade and protect the ground. So corn was thought to be domesticated 7,000 years ago, but indigenous stories place it back to 10,000 years ago. And the ancestor to corn is Teosinte. And this can be found in the central Balsas River Valley of Mexico. So right here. And this is Chiapas, right? The mountain range here. And so Teosinte is first found in the central Balsas Valley, right here next to Mexico City. So this is the point of origin for indigenous peoples, and it spreads all the way down here south into Guatemala, into Belize, into Central America, right? Here's a map that is also in your slides that you can look at more closely, but this is showing the production of maize and how it's changed over time. Specifically, the pink line represents before colonization, right? Before 1493. And then the black line signifies the colonizers, the Spaniards, the Europeans taking corn back to their countries. And then the blue line is signifying hybrid varieties. I just wanted to show this slide for folks who are interested in nutrition or how corn cultivates. Corn does take 100 days to grow, and you can see that it can get really tall. And if you've never seen a corn stalk, I recommend going out and trying to find one or go check out a corn farm. There were many uses of corn, so it wasn't just about using the actual kernels itself. It was about using the husk for wrapping tamales or washing things with, stuffing pillows. It was about using the stigma, so inside of the corn, it served as diuretic. The cob was used to fuel fires, and then green stalks were used for fertilizer. So every part of the corn was used, right? Growing corn was very difficult, and as we learn more about the Mayans, we'll learn more about their innovations, but corn was definitely one of those innovations. They developed elaborate irrigation canals. They had to often use this technique called slash and burn, where they would have to cut away the forest and burn the land to make it ready for a crop, because in southern Mexico and like the Yucatan Peninsula, it's very dense with rainforest. And so you don't just have these open, vast lands where you are producing corn. You have to make it work for you. And so irrigation canals, the slash and burn technique, all of this was really important to developing really successful corn crops. Here's a full-size corn stalk here, and you can see just the size difference with the person next to it. These are the irrigation canals, and I'll upload a video of those next week. I also want to mention that corn tells us about the civilization in regards to gender. So there was gender duality with our indigenous cultures, at least in the early stages of the Mayan period. Women were responsible for post-production, so storage, preparation, and cleanup. But this was seen as just as prestigious as the men who were harvesting the corn. It was equal. Each role had a really important meaning. And then women were seen in the image of corn. So they were seen as the providers and the nurturers. So women in Mayan culture, Olmec culture, in the early Mesoamerican cultures, they're seen as having a special spirituality to them, energy, because they're life bearers, right? I also have a great video about nixtamalization, which is basically how you get from corn to masa to tortillas. And if you've never seen this process, it's so fascinating, and it's a very laborious process. So thank your mothers and your grandmothers or your fathers, whoever is making the tortillas, because this is a long and arduous process. And so it's really important that you learn how tortillas are made, obviously. So I'll go ahead and post that so you can watch it. And lastly, corn is being used to heal. So there are curanderos, right, healers, who are using the kernels to predict, how one might feel, predict the future, but also they're using it to treat, the illness. And so, for example, with the fortune tellers, they would use the maize kernels to try to tell your future, which is called CHIC, and it's trying to separate the good from the bad. So CHIC was at one time a principal method used by the Akmen to determine the outcome of an illness. So the Akmen are healers of Mayan culture who are using corn again as the central part of their how they heal people. I also have a video on that I can share with you as well. So corn today, where is corn today? Are indigenous people still cultivating corn? And the answer is yes, indigenous people are still cultivating corn. However, there are threats of big corporations like Monsanto. We know that there's a huge amount of corn that is GMO, genetically modified. I think the number is like 90% of corn is now genetically modified. And that's because we have these huge corporations that are buying up land in Mexico and using it to turn a profit, right? But there are indigenous communities throughout the Yucatan Peninsula who are fighting back against that. Specifically, we have the Zapatistas, and the Zapatistas are an indigenous community who are militantly fighting against the government for the right to their indigenous culture. But the fact of the matter is that less young people are becoming corn farmers, and so we are starting to see the loss of the rich diversity of corn, right? Because there's hundreds and hundreds of different types of corn. All right, that's what I have for you today. Thank you for being here and taking notes. And I will see you all next week. I'll try to get everything uploaded on Monday so that you can see it all up front and do it throughout the week. As you know, we're very much adjusting to this online work schedule, online teaching style. And, you know, I'm trying to keep up with the most up-to-date strategies for how to teach, you know, in this format and how to engage with you. And we are, you know, developing this as we go. You know, we have the material, we have all of that, but getting it to you in an online format so that you can learn and be engaged and, you know, enjoy it is another thing. So that's where I'm really taking my time to make sure that you all feel like you're a part of this community. And that's really, really important to me. So yeah, check back on Monday for that week's activities, and I'll be seeing you soon. All right, thank you.